Hello beautiful people, I'm so happy that you are tuning in and checking out this video on a very important mental health topic. For those of you who are new to my channel, my name is Paula Sinisterra and I am a licensed associate professional counselor, basically a mental health therapist and a certified hypnotherapist. So today I am going to be talking to you guys about one of the most commonly misdiagnosed and mistreated disorders, mental health disorders that are currently active that we know about. That disorder that I'm referring to is obsessive compulsive disorder, okay? I think making a video about this is so important because there are so many misconceptions and misunderstandings surrounding what this is really about. So how can we begin to identify whether we or somebody that we know or care about is struggling with obsessive compulsive disorder? This is identified by somebody having obsessive thoughts and oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes compulsions associated with those obsessions, okay? What obsessions are defined as are recurrent, persistent thoughts, urges, or images that are experienced as intrusive, distressing, and anxiety-provoking for those that experience it. Things that we don't want in our mind, thoughts and urges or images that really cause like a lot of distress when they come in, right? The compulsions are behaviors that we engage in to try to neutralize or get rid of the anxiety that comes from the recurrent thoughts, images, and urges that are constantly popping in our mind when we are struggling with obsessive compulsive disorder. Now, I know that most of you and the media most often portrays obsessive compulsive disorder as this condition in which somebody might be constantly washing their hands or organizing compulsively or making sure that everything is symmetrical and things of that nature, okay? Now, those are compulsions. All those things that I just identified, those behaviors, are compulsions that do happen for a lot of people who experience OCD. But there's much more to OCD than that, okay? So OCD, like I said, being a combination of obsessive thoughts, urges, and images constantly coming into our brain, sometimes accompanied by these compulsions, can show up in so many different ways for people. Now, what we do know about it is that there is scientific research and all kinds of neuroscientific studies to show that there is very much a biochemical, physical difference in the brain of people that struggle with obsessive compulsive disorder. Obsessions and compulsions, or even just obsessions, which I'm gonna get a little more into, but if you're just experiencing the obsessive part of it, it's just in your mind without the behaviors that go along with it, you could also be struggling with obsessive compulsive disorder, okay? So like I was saying, research shows that people that struggle with this often, not often, but they do have differences in the way that their brain is structured, and there's a part of the brain called the orbital cortex that tends to get stuck in people that struggle with this. And it's basically this part of the brain helps us shift gears from one thought to another, from one behavior to another. And in people that struggle with this, it seems to get stuck, right? So often OCD is called brain lock for that reason, because there could be an obsessive thought, image, or urge that enters into our mind and we get stuck on it, right? So what ends up often happening is that their brain comes up with behaviors, often irrational and often excessive, that the brain tells them and their mind tells them that if you do this, you will be able to bring down the anxiety associated with this thought, urge, and the image that keeps intruding itself on your mind, right? It can actually also be characterized by having the obsessions and, in addition to that, engaging in avoidance behaviors to protect ourselves from the anxiety that happens from those obsessions, right? So something as seemingly normal maybe as like procrastination can be part of obsessive compulsive disorder when it's done to the extreme, right? When maybe we're in school and we are, and we feel anxiety about certain assignments, or we feel anxiety about work, and we engage in obsessively avoiding doing that work. So we know that these types of behavior, thoughts, and patterns are obsessive compulsive disorder, depending on how persistent they are, how much of our day we spend being distressed by these things, how much control we have over them, how much we try to resist them, and things of that nature that basically measure the severity of it, right? Because a lot of these symptoms of like distress and repetitive thoughts and getting stuck in loops and things like that are often experienced by people with anxiety, right? Now, a lot of researchers are referring to generalized anxiety or anxiety disorders as OCD light, because those rigid behaviors and avoidant and obsessive patterns that we often see in people with anxiety, when amplified, are the precursors to obsessive compulsive disorder. And actually, both anxiety and OCD are best treated, the gold standard for treatment is exposure and response prevention, right? So we want to help people basically face into whatever they are afraid of, whatever their compulsions try to keep them away from, whatever that is, we want to help them face into it and refrain from engaging in the compulsion, whether that be, and just so you know, like I was saying earlier, compulsions can be a physical action, but they can also be purely internal and mental, right? So if, for example, our brain is stuck on these horrific images that we might harm somebody, right? Which is something that not a lot of people know is OCD. It's not one of the, in the general popular media, it doesn't get talked about too often. But if, for example, our brain gets stuck on this fear that we might harm somebody, we might try to use mental rituals to try to neutralize the anxiety or distract ourselves from it, like counting or repeating certain things over again, or seeking reassurance, which is actually also a compulsion. Often what we have noticed about OCD and the things that our brain tends to get stuck on are based on our values, right? So we know, and scientific research has shown, that there is a biological basis for the actual obsessive compulsive disorder, but as far as the specific content that our particular obsessive compulsive obsessions and compulsions tend to focus on, there's many common ones, but they are unique often across individuals, and they can come in many varieties. So it's much more than just the cleaning, and it's much more than the compulsive organizing, like I said, although that's part of it. There's a variety, infinite amount of content that our mind can get stuck on and obsess on. And often what points us in the direction of why our mind gets stuck on certain things, it's usually related to the things that we value, right? So if we value our life, for example, our mind might get stuck on this obsessive recurrent thought that I'm gonna kill myself, right? And this is one of the reasons that OCD is so often misdiagnosed, because somebody could come into a therapist's office or a psychiatrist's office terrified and tell them, I'm having these thoughts that I'm gonna kill myself, but they're actually terrified of it, right? So then we can identify that this is not an actual suicidal person. This is OCD content, because OCD content is usually not OCD content is characterized by being something that is ego dystonic, meaning that it's something that is opposed to our values, opposed to who we are. So for example, somebody that really cares about, being moral and, following the law might become obsessed with the thought that they might accidentally steal something, and they might engage in all kinds of compulsions, avoidance behaviors, to make sure that they don't steal something to the extent that it could interrupt their life, right? So like they could start avoiding stores, start avoiding grocery stores, right? And things of that nature, like daily, everyday activities that we should be able to go into without thinking twice. Obsessive compulsive disorder starts to attack, right? So when we have these obsessions that are opposed and different from our values, our brain tries to solve the problem, because our brain is a problem-solving machine, by finding compulsions to engage in to make sure that we don't actually carry that out, or to try to get rid of the anxiety that's coming up from it. In treatment, what we do is that we start identifying what the obsessions are and what the compulsions are that we try to engage in to manage or mitigate the obsession. So untreated, it can become very debilitating, because as we continue to engage in the obsessions and the compulsions or the rituals or, you know, the neutralizing thought patterns that we do to try to get rid of the anxiety around the obsessive thoughts, the more that we continue to merge these two things of the obsessions and compulsions together, the more that the pattern gets cemented into our brain, and the more elaborate and more recurrent that the compulsions end up becoming, right? So we could start out with, you know, fear of germs and having to clean because of those fears, because, you know, our brain starts telling us that we could, you know, get sick and die if we touch something that's contaminated, right? And then we start engaging in the cleaning that's associated with that. The more that we give into the cleaning compulsion, the stronger that connection gets in our brain, and the longer and more elaborate all of these rituals end up becoming, to the point that they end up seriously interfering with our life, right? So at its core, OCD is rooted in fear and need for control, right? And extreme distress at certain thoughts, urges, and images that come through our brain, right? People that don't have OCD might have a negative thought, like I might, you know, just an irrational thought, like what if I drove off the road? And you know, like we've all had that at one point, like what if my steering wheel like turns and I just drive off, right? Most of us, when that happens, kind of like shake it off, like, oh, that was a weird thought, you know, and we keep going. When our brain has a tendency to get stuck, a thought like that, you know, if we're the kind of person that really values our life, could become an obsession, because it's like a warning sign to our brain. It's like, oh my God, why did I think that? I can't think that. Does that mean I really want to do it? So in OCD, these thoughts become so much bigger because we get stuck on them, because we don't want them there, because we are fighting them. And then we end up engaging in the behaviors and compulsions to try to get rid of them, which makes the thought that much more important, which makes the compulsion that much more necessary. Before we know it, it takes over our entire life, okay? In addition to that, I would say that it's really important to identify that trying to think positively or trying to block our thoughts when we are struggling with anxiety or OCD does not work, and it's not a good idea, because the more that we try to block a thought or like neutralize it by trying to shove our brain with something positive, the more that we are actually sending a message to our brain that that thought is really important, and the more that we are trying to suppress it, and the more that we're trying to fight it, right? Now, that happens in anxiety, but it can be OCD depending on to what extent that thought is taking over your life. So I'm just gonna repeat that over and over again and trying to explain this to people, because like I said, OCD is not something that is easily or often recognized, and it gets so often misdiagnosed, but it does share many features with anxiety, and it can even show features of like, you know, suicidal or quote unquote psychotic behavior when the person is not psychotic or suicidal, but it's just a thought that they might be that enters their brain that starts traumatizing them and really scaring them, so that they engage in all the things to try to get rid of it. So Thought blocking, trying to think positive, does not work when we're dealing with this, and that's really important to point out, especially with the current trends and everything about like positive affirmations and don't think that way and try to control those thoughts. The more that we try to control them, the more that we get stuck on them. It's like that whole notion of don't think about a pink elephant. What did you just do when I said that? You thought about a pink elephant. What we want to do is start showing our brain that the thought is not a big deal, okay? We want to start identifying that was OCD. My brain is repeating this thought because it is particularly triggered by this specific topic, because I really care about my life, or because I care about things, I care about my health, or because I care about the law, whatever it is. Our brain got stuck on it, and when we have a sticky OCD brain structure, we can get really trapped in it. And the idea is not to fight it. The idea is to learn to identify like that is an OCD thought, okay? And although I cannot control that thought coming into my brain, I can control what I do with it. I can control how much importance I give it, right? The first step to not giving it as much importance is relabeling it as an OCD thought, relabeling it as an obsession, relabeling it as an obsessive pattern or thought loop that my brain just got locked on. So the more importance that I try to give it and the more that I feed into what it's telling me to do or to avoid, the more that I'm going to get locked on it. So after identifying that I'm, experiencing distress as a result of this thought, image, or urge, because it is OCD, then that creates enough space, right, to where we can start choosing, like, I'm not gonna engage in the compulsive behavior that my brain is now telling me to engage in to get rid of the anxiety associated with those obsessions. I'm not gonna do it because I'm not gonna feed it. Every time that I do what OCD wants me to do, I'm actually feeding it and I'm strengthening those connections, when what I really want is to start starving it and start debilitating those connections. And research, and there is so much evidence to show that when we start disrupting that pattern, when we start identifying this is an OCD thought, I'm not going to engage in the compulsion, I'm not going to engage in the thought ritual, I'm not going to engage the avoidance that it's telling me to do. The more that we continue to do that and persist through that, our brain actually does start to change and we can experience significant healing, okay? So while OCD may never go away entirely, because in a lot of ways it is a chronic condition, right? It may never go away entirely, but it can, by engaging in this therapy and this treatment of relabeling, refraining from doing what it's telling me to do, facing into the exact opposite of what it's telling me to do, much in the same way as we do with anxiety, I am building so much character. I am building so much mindful awareness, so much mental strength, and literally restructuring my brain so that I beat this thing and I am in charge of it, and it might be present and I might notice it coming up all the time, and I'm prepared for it to come up now. Once I have identified that what I'm struggling with is OCD, I'm prepared. Like, I'm gonna wake up, I'm gonna know, like, my mind is probably gonna find things to get obsessed about today. That's what it does. It likes to do that. Now, how much importance I'm gonna give to that, or how much I'm gonna engage in attempts to neutralize it and be distressed by it and behaviors to try to get rid of it, that's what I can control, and I'm not gonna give in, right? So OCD, going through this treatment, really starts training like a warrior mentality, right? So not a victim mentality, a warrior mentality. Once we identify what I'm struggling with this OCD, I'm gonna fight it. I'm not gonna let this thing beat me. We can start taking the steps necessary to unwire the tightness and the strength of those connections in our brain so that we can take it back, okay? Now, some obsessive compulsive There's some versions of obsessive compulsive disorder that we are not that familiar with that I want to talk about and point out to you guys that exist are things like relationship OCD, right? So most of us experience some distress from our relationships when things aren't going right or our partner does something that we don't like, whatever it is. When people have relationship OCD, these kind of distress around their relationships, an obsession about the relationships, an obsession about the types of experiences that they have in their relationships are actually symptoms of obsessive compulsive disorder if they're going on persistently, consistently, and are distressing enough, right? So something like being obsessed with things going wrong in our relationship or evaluating our partner obsessively is actually obsessive compulsive disorder. It does not mean that you're a bad person. It does not mean that you don't care about your partner. It means that your brain is getting stuck on things related to your partner or things related to your relationships or things related to your interactions because you actually care so much about those people and about those interactions. So like I said, OCD varies so widely across people, and it depends on what you care about. Sometimes the way that it shows up is just purely like I'm gonna engage in this compulsion or this reassurance seeking behavior, because seeking reassurance is another form of compulsion. So actually in OCD treatment, we start training people and their families to abstain from giving them reassurance because the reassurance feeds the OCD. So, people that struggle with like obsessions of getting sick or obsessions that I might be sick, their compulsion might be to go to the doctor over and over again or to this doctor, to that doctor until they get the right answer. And it's actually obsessive compulsive disorder. The compulsion in that case is seeking reassurance from different types of medical professionals, but it's never going to be enough, right? So that's one of the important things to identify also when it comes to obsessive compulsive disorder, that like no amount of reassurance, no amount of compulsive behavior, no amount of mental rituals is ever going to be enough to get rid of the thought or to get rid of the anxiety associated with the thought, right? The more that we engage in all those things, the more that the anxiety associated with those thoughts, images, and urges grows, and the more that it controls our life. So we want to start identifying when an OCD thought pops up, and in response, we want to refocus on something that we value, continue moving towards the things that we care about, and not engage in all the behaviors, mental rituals, and compulsions that our brain tries to solve the distress with, okay? Because all those things, like I said over and over again, are gonna strengthen the OCD connection in our brain, okay? So relationship OCD is a thing. Compulsively ordering things around your house to the extent that it gets in the way of your relationships in your life, that is a thing. Obsessing, getting stuck on a thought about somebody like over and over again without being able to stop, or just any kind of like thought that like grips us and we can't get out of it, that's obsessive compulsive disorder. Now, this video is not meant for you to diagnose yourself as much as it is for you to educate yourself and to learn that your brain being obsessive and getting stuck in these thought loops over and over again to the point that it's debilitating might be obsessive compulsive disorder. And I would encourage you with all of my heart to go out and seek treatment, because it is treatable. It is very much treatable, and we can become so much stronger as a result of the treatment. And in some ways, of course, like never wishing that, no one ever wishes that they had this dysfunction in their brain. But when we learn to overcome it and become stronger than it, there is nothing that can stop us. Like if we can handle that, we can pretty much handle almost anything that comes our way. So going through the treatment of obsessive compulsive disorder really builds warriors, and it really builds a level of mindfulness and awareness to our thoughts that people that don't struggle with this aren't gonna ever come across or need to come across, right? So like I said, like no one ever wishes this, but it is a very powerful brain that often struggles with obsessive compulsive disorder, and we can harness all of that power to overcome it and become that much more of a stronger person that can contribute so much to the world. Because the truth is that people that have a tendency towards obsessive minds also are some of the most intelligent people, and they have so much like attention to detail and power and commitment and discipline inside of them to be serious contributing members to society, right? So like I said, like, you know, nobody would ever necessarily wish that they had this, but it's important for us to recognize as we work through this and as we learn to get more educated on what comes along with it and how to overcome it, that there are also gifts to having the kind of brain that tends to be obsessive, right? Just like there's the good and bad to anything. This is one particular type of brain structure, and the first step to like mastering ourselves and to getting, you know, stepping more and more into our full potential is identifying what kind of brain we have been equipped with. Once we start identifying like what kind of brain we have been equipped with, then we can be its master, use that obsessive tendency towards the things that we actually want to accomplish and towards our values, and harness it in and refrain from the compulsions that it tells, or the obsessiveness that goes along with it whenever it is getting in the way of our life, right? So part of all this is just learning what kind of brain we have been equipped with, and instead of feeling like a victim for it, becoming a warrior about it, so that so that we become so much more powerful and are actually able to continue to thrive and step into our full potential and pass on our gifts and our particular type of intelligence onto the world. So I hope that this helped to inform some people out there that might be struggling with OCD and might not know it, or might have a loved one that you think could be struggling with OCD. Or you know, something, it's whatever they're struggling with seems to resemble this pattern. I would encourage you to share this video, to also like it if you feel that you benefited from it, and to subscribe so that more and more people can start having access to this information. Now, once again, I would love nothing more than to hear from you guys. Comment below if you have any questions or there's any specific topics that you want me to expand on further. And yeah, I love you. You're all so powerful and so strong, and I believe in you, and we all have the capacity to live life at our full potential once we identify what kind of brain we have been equipped with, so that we no longer fall for its tricks, but can harness all of its powers, okay? I love you guys. Have an awesome rest of your week, and I will be checking back in again next Friday.